I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, where we take a book that you say, that's odd, what could be in there? And we read it so you don't have to.
And Ashley, if you were a celebrity and you were writing your own memoir, would anything from this week have made it?
You know, if I write a memoir when I'm older, right now, this is a week that I'm getting older numerically.
Oh, yeah, your birthday is the day after tomorrow, huh?
Yeah. And so I feel like it's one of those things where I've been encountering a lot of youth. And whenever my age comes up, they're always like, oh my God, you don't even look it. Or like they try to make you feel better about it. And I feel like the older I get, the more I am quite stoked on my age. Like I feel like my life right now is funner and better than it's ever been ever. And so to be like, oh, but I'm almost 33, like that is cool.
There's nothing more annoying than when people are like, you're how old? And they're 23. And I'm like, yeah, bitch. And it sucks to be you.
They're always like clamoring over themselves to be like, oh my God, no way, no. Oh my God, no.
And I'm like, everything you're doing, I can do that too, but I have more money and confidence.
When they're like, I never would have guessed that you're that old. I'm like, oh, I wish you would have guessed because it means you think highly of me.
I've said it once and I'll say it before. People obsessed with staying young looking. How was society treating you at 24 that you're hoping they treat you that way forever?
There's something about 33. 32, I feel like was a weird like middle-y year where like being 30 and 31 was very like, I'm in my 30s and it's cool. And then 32, I was like, what does this even mean? But 33 is still such a young age, but I feel like I have experienced stuff and realized things.
I was just saying that Ashley, she keeps talking about when we go to Australia, like it's our last week on Earth. And I'm like, Ashley, if we've already done a tour in Australia at the age of 33 for you, then like, why would it be inconceivable to think that we'd go back again in a few years? I just think if we're already there once, we're going to be there twice.
How often are planes going back and forth to Australia?
Let me tell you something. 2 years ago, I got engaged in June in Italy. And my grandma came with me. She went to Croatia with my family, and then she came to Italy with me for the engagement. And then do you know where she went after?
Where?
Egypt for 2 weeks by herself. She was in her like mid to late 70s. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I cannot believe she's going to Africa all by herself in her 70s. What a trooper. Do you know where my grandma is right now?
Australia?
No, back in Africa for 3 fucking weeks. That bitch cannot stop taking 20-hour flights. She's in her late 70s. She might go back to Africa again.
It's just easy to forget. It's easy to forget that like you could just keep doing stuff. And I feel like the older I get, the more I remember it, but still I don't remember it enough. And so then I'm like, oh, well, I got to keep aging so that one of these lessons fucking sticks inside this noggin.
I can't wait.
Because the older you get, the more you dry out a little bit and you're more like Velcro to attract. Yes. Things stick harder.
Yes, there's more friction.
Exactly. When you're young, you're too
juicy,
slippery.
You're slick.
You're greasy like a stick of butter left in the sun. You've got to freeze up a little bit.
Like Jell-O in a fridge.
Exactly. That's how I feel now. Solidified but still malleable to new experiences, but enough so that you would stick like you're in a mold.
And that's 33.
Anyway, Claire, what would happen in your memoir?
Okay, I don't want to say because I don't want to jinx myself. This morning, I did something that almost made me sick to my stomach. I almost puked all morning.
Oh, because you were productive?
Worse than that, I was administratively productive. Worse than that, I was government-based administratively productive. I had to get my passport renewed because I'm going on a trip next week. That's why I don't want to jinx it. Will not know that I got my passport back until I'm holding it in my hands 2 p.m. Thursday. So
I guess we'll re-record this intro.
You'll know if you look it up and I'm not on vacation, then know that things went horribly wrong. But I think my phobia is, my phobias are twofold. One, going to jail for IRS tax problems, and then being put on the no-fly list. And I know that that's unreasonable, but actually I don't know that's unreasonable. And in like the pit of my stomach, I think that's so plausible.
That unreasonable.
When I was thinking about it today in yoga, because I had a lot of time to sit and think about how scared I am of the government, I was like, I'm not even that scared of going to jail. Like the idea of breaking the law and getting arrested, that doesn't put me in any stress. But the idea of the IRS banging on my door and being like, you filled out forms wrong. I can't do a form. I have some kind of learning disability where forms make me quiver. And I was in the passport office, like in tears, being like, could you check, did I spell my name wrong? And I was like, this boxes, did they let? And they're like, yeah, it's fine. And I kept going, and this is the last step, and this is the last step. And I could tell they did not enjoy my energy, but I just kept being like, how much longer can this go on where I could find out I made a mistake? And last night at 10 p.m., I found out that you actually have to print out your own stuff to go to the passport office.
Well, there's something.
Which I, of course, did not foresee at all. My passport appointment was 7:30 a.m. This was 10 p.m. that I had found this all out. Of course, I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Luckily, where I live is a really interesting culture
Of printing?
And you would never believe it, but it turns out on my corner alone, there's 4 24-hour printing venues.
Okay, I had no idea that you lived in like a cultural mecca.
I didn't know that I lived in an Office Depot parking lot, but apparently I do. I had never really taken the time to get to know where I was. Mac was like, I think there's a place on the corner that'll print this. And then I walked in and I was like,
do you have a printer?
Yeah, but we didn't have any paper and I do not, I don't know. That to me seemed like a mistake to even try and set that thing up. But we went to the corner and Mac was like, yeah, and if you don't like this one, I just saw the next door one and the one after that also do printing. There's this place across the street from me. God bless them. They're 24 hours barbershop and accountant office.
Well, then why are you so fucking freaked out all the time? If you have a 24-hour barber and an accountant within walking distance of your house, name one problem that can't be solved there.
I don't know, because I was literally thinking that I was like, at 4 a.m. I could get my hair cut and my taxes done. Why am I always on edge?
Especially because that could solve your no-fly list problem, right? You get a little disguise.
Don't say that. I don't want the government to know.
To know about your secret bangs.
Fear. Anyway, it all worked out, but I guess like we'll know when we know. I still have this fear that I filled something out wrong or something. I was like sick to my stomach. I'm still sick to my stomach about it.
I guess like the thing is, nothing has ever happened that's made me feel logistically comfortable in my life. Like the way that we rant and rave about all the things that could go wrong, it's because we've constantly been surprised as two people who for much of our careers have handled our own logistics about the things that can logistically go wrong. And like they're never something you could ever anticipate.
I will say, I thought I was so on top of my game, being like the day before I go into the passport appointment, I'm going to look at the website and see what I need and collect the goods. Never in a million years could I have predicted
that you would
need a printer or that I should do it while businesses were open.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm still trembling a bit because I'm scared. If I was in an alley and somebody put a gun to my head and said, give me your wallet, give me your phone, I would say, take it. Material goods have literally no meaning to me. If someone put a gun to my head and said, do you have receipts? Physical, literal receipts from all the things that you have expensed to your business, I would say, shoot me.
Oh, I've never asked for a receipt a day in my life.
Why isn't the credit card statement the receipt?
I don't know.
I don't get it either. But anyway, if I am dead, it is because I am audited. So this book is called All About Eevee, Into the Oddity, about Yvie Oddly, the winner of season 11 RuPaul's Drag Race.
And a participant of RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars, All Winners. I want to discuss this book before we open the book. This book, All About Eevee, Into the Oddity by Yvie Oddly with Michael Bach, was not written by Yvie Oddly. It was written by Michael Bach with Yvie Oddly. It is like an odd turn of memoir in that it is not at all what I would consider a memoir.
I'm looking at the page, literally one, and on the publication page, it says, this book is a memoir reflecting the author's present recollections of experiences over time. Its stories and its words are the author's alone. That's actually not true.
Okay, so this book was written, I think, the way a lot of the memoirs we read are written. However, instead of using a first-person narrative, the ghostwriter just writes it as a writer interviewing Yvie Oddly.
It's more similar to an article or a biography, maybe. I've never read a biography.
It reads very much like one of those thousands of words features in Vanity Fair, where you like show up to the interviewee and you're in like a hotel suite and they're sitting cross-legged eating spaghetti.
She walked in delicately. The whole cafe turned to look.
She folded her legs underneath her.
She doesn't know how beautiful she is. Her sunglasses danced beneath her stunning eyes. You have to notice how beautiful. It used to be like her breasts walked in first and then Julia Roberts came in next.
That's how Rob Lowe wrote his memoir.
That's actually very true. I just noticed another part of this book that I didn't even notice when I was reading it.
Uh-huh.
The dedication. Can I read who Yvie Oddly dedicates this book to?
I'd love to hear.
I dedicate this book to my cats, for whom I'm eternally grateful. At this point, I was like, oh, cats must be what an Yvie Oddly fan is called.
No.
I know your affection might not come easily and is often misunderstood, but this is why mommy works so damn hard. It's all worth it for the sweet reward of hearing your furry little purries. I promise that someday you will have all the finest things this mortal life has to offer such divine beings. Also, you have my permission to eat me when I die. So I think that's like quite literally their cats.
What if I do the exact same dedication, but to Bug?
It would be like preposterous because I feel like that's what you say to her every night.
I know. I always say that I wish we would get eaten by a shark together so that all of our tissue tangled up into one ball.
You often say that?
I say it every night.
Okay.
Okay, so the first chapter. So the first chapter is the only part that is really written by Eevee. And again, I think that this is the way most books are written. It's just an interesting choice to change the perspective, not change, to correctly say the perspective of the writer and the memoirist, or I guess most of the time interviewee.
It's a little strange writing a book about yourself. Like, how fragile does a person's ego have to be to publish a cry for validation? It's even more strange considering that most memoirs are written after the peak of someone's career, not at the beginning. You read that right, so let's be clear. No matter where you're picking up my story, it's just getting started. So then they get into how a few years ago they decided to write a book because of all the crazy things that had happened in their life. And then they're like, I ended up using a ghostwriter, Michael, because I speak like I think, just stream of consciousness. And then Eevee and Michael, the ghostwriter, not so ghost, actually quite physical, present author.
Yeah. Present narrator.
Met up and they worked on this book. And basically Eevee's like, I'm going to talk about getting on RuPaul. I'm going to talk about my fans and I'm going to talk about my gender identity. But this will not be a tell-all. This will be just me honestly telling you stuff.
Not all, but stuff. I really liked about this book the way that there was no real like putting on airs. I think that there is a lot of hobnobbing done in some of these memoirs. I don't think that's the right word. I can't think of exactly what it is, but like I think for a Drag Race memoir,
knuckle kissing.
There's a lot of kissing of the ring.
Oh yeah, sorry. You're not kissing their knuckles, you're kissing their jewelry.
Yeah.
I could visualize it in my head, but I forgot the purpose.
It's like the least salty part of a hand.
I love to suck on some knuck.
Anyway, so Eevee does state a lot throughout this book. I think things that would be very difficult for someone who's been on Drag Race or someone who rose to fame via online fandom, things like that. Like these are difficult things to say, but I like how honest it is. Mm-hmm. So Eevee says, you know, I would not really be in a position to write this book if it hadn't been for Drag Race, but I am a drag queen with or without Drag Race.
They also reveal the process. The interview process was tough at times. Michael and I spent more than 30 hours talking, including one time when I was in the bathtub, thanks Zoom, digging into parts of my life that I hadn't thought about in a long time.
30 hours doesn't feel that long.
I know. It's funny to be like, I worked so hard on this book. Less than a full working week. Like a French working week. I hope you enjoyed the book. I really do. Believe it or not, my goal is always to ensure my fans are enjoying the art that I put out into the world. But if you don't, you're welcome to kindly fuck yourself. Love you, bitches. So then we have a chapter that I've never before seen in the likes of memoirs since. And we have read, of course, over 200 memoirs. Michael's opening thoughts. This is a little chapter about the writer of this book.
This is a book all about Eevee, from their birth to coming out, to their evolution as a drag artist, to the rise to global superstardom. This book is not a tell-all. I know, we already found out. I wanted this book to be a love letter to the fandom. I've gotten to do something that very few people have. I've had the chance to know Yvie Oddly on a very deep level. I've come to see them for who they are, brilliantly talented, incredibly complex, deeply intelligent, and somewhat insecure, angry, kind, gentle, and beautiful. I hope you read these pages and you'll see what I see.
Interestingly enough, Michael talks about how in 2020, when everyone in the world was locked away, I had an idea. What if I started to write about some of the queens from Drag Race? I started reaching out to a select few of my favorites whom I wanted to know more about, and the first one to bite was none other than Yvie Oddly, winner of season 11. Two things. One, it's not 100% contradictory, but it's a different energy than what Yvie suggests in just the previous chapter, which is like Yvie is like, well, I wanted to write a book, and then Michael came into my life and it was perfect. And then Michael's like, I reached out to Yvie and was like, can I write your book? And based on the amount of work Yvie puts into this, I can't imagine that Yvie was like that desperate to write a book, because this feels very co-author heavy in a way that we've never seen before. But I do think it makes sense that this book is more a long form interview that gets pretty deep.
Yes.
And I think for that, it's actually quite interesting. And there's a lot in this book that I did find very interesting. But to categorize it as memoir, there's so many lines and passages and stylistic choices that are a bit weird.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk to Eevee at the end of this episode. We haven't had our conversation yet, but we will be interviewing them. And I'm so interested to discuss the process and the choices because this book was good and interesting, and I want to know Eevee more.
So interestingly enough, I think Eevee is one of the first memoirs we've read that it's exactly our age, besides maybe Jeanette McCurdy.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was very struck by being like, oh, we are exact contemporaries. And when they were talking about their childhood, I'm like, I know exactly the time and place you grew up. You grew up in Denver. They're exactly 1 year younger than me, but they're basically our age.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're quite a bit younger than you, huh?
Yeah, I guess by like years and years. Like we would have been in high school at the same time, but we probably wouldn't have been friends.
So it was hard for you to relate to.
I would have probably not talked to a freshman or a sophomore when I was a senior.
Oh, crazy. So it starts off, as all great memoirs, with the story of the parents, Jessica and Sheps.
Sheps also used to be named Khalil. So sometimes if we're reading exact quotes.
Yeah, it's one and the same.
Sheps' parents were the founders of the Denver chapter of the Black Panthers.
Mm-hmm. And Sheps went to Howard University to study history and then came right back to Denver. But he was kind of a known figure, especially in the like Black Denver community.
And they just like couldn't go anywhere without Sheps getting recognized.
It's not called out specifically, but I sense that Jessica, the mother, is white.
So Jessica and Sheps were best friends and she was in love with him.
And then while he was in college, she had a boyfriend and this other guy she was sleeping with. And she also slept with Khalil. And she had the baby. And when the baby was born, she went, oh, this is Sheps' kid.
Yeah. One fateful afternoon, August 22nd, 1993, Jovan Jordan Bridges, or Joe, as his mama calls him, came into the world.
So Yvie Oddly was born Jovan. And because Sheps didn't believe it was his baby, because Jovan's mom had a boyfriend at the time, Sheps went back to college in Washington, D.C. at Howard. And she was left to kind of be a single mom.
Well, she wasn't left to be a single mom. Her boyfriend was like, that's my son. And she kept being like, no, it's not. Khalil refused to accept it. And Jason was the complete opposite. He said, well, I want to take a paternity test and prove that he's my son.
And then he was wrong. It was, in fact, Sheps' son. I thought this was a cute story, though. She was in college at the time, I think, studying medicine. My dad, because I had given birth to Joe, went to school for me for a week and took notes.
That's so sweet.
Isn't that cute?
Raising Joe became a family affair. In addition to her parents, there were many others who helped out. As Jessica explains, one of Dad's ex-girlfriends was babysitting for him for a while because he was too young to go to daycare, so she babysat for probably the first couple months or so. I mean, that's having a community.
So he's born, and Sheps does take on the burden of being the father.
The burden.
What would you call it? The responsibility. He doesn't like drop out of school. He finishes school, but he's like, when I was home from school, I would hang out with the kid. And then when I came back, I fully stepped up.
So then Jessica marries a man named Don.
Don sucks.
Don sucks. So Don is Eevie's stepdad for many years, and he is awful.
Jovan was born, though, smart and happy, but he also had a different side to his personality. He was very sad and serious. Part of that was probably my sadness because I was too.
So then Jessica and Don have a daughter named Leah. For a while, I think Don was kind of a parent, more involved as a stepfather. And then when there was a biological child between him and Jessica, Don was mostly just the parent to that child and mean to Joe/Eevie.
Joe began a rotation where he spent some time living with his father, then his grandparents, then his aunt, and on and on. It wasn't until Jessica and Don finally split that Jovan would move back in with his mother.
And the reason Joe had to move out is because Don became very abusive.
Don was abusive in addition to being unfaithful, but like many women in abusive relationships, she stayed. I thought to myself, this man's cheating on me all the time. I'm not going to do this, but I did. I stayed with Don for years. So Joe had a rough upbringing at times, watching Don just be terrible to me. He was abusive to me. And then after years went by, he became abusive towards Joe. So that's when he moves out and starts kind of being on rotation.
So Eevie says, I grew up in very strange circumstances. My mom was in school for most of my young life. Don was also extremely homophobic. So when Eevie was little, there was this doll that they were obsessed with. And Don was like, my boy is not playing with no doll. He would try to take the doll away from Joe. Jessica was pretty accepting. I would tell him from time to time, you know, if you ever liked boys, I wouldn't be bothered by it. I would still love you. And later there's another conversation about it where Jessica is kind of painted as saying, I'll still love you. You're definitely going to hell, but I love you.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about this, the way this is written, because these early chapters are very much from his parents' perspectives. And they're like, of course we were okay with Jovan being gay and we tried to be supportive. And this was the truth about the stepdad. But then there's no cross-checking with how Jovan felt, which makes it so much different than a memoir, because you can tell later when Jovan's talking about their upbringing, they were like, yeah, I had a lot of internalized homophobia and a lot of that came from Dawn. And of course, this conversation that Ashley just referenced, like the sense of his mom would still love them, but there was still a lot of shame in being gay. And it's interesting to like not have that all in the same section.
Yeah, because usually in a memoir, even though they are a lot of times heavily ghostwritten, they're still referencing the emotional response in that moment. Well, this is how I felt based on what they're saying.
So Eevie actually went to a special performing arts school in high school, and their dad was really about them going to public school. I wonder why. Their dad was just like, when you go to public school, that's when you get name calling and all that, and you have to learn to survive that. And high school is the place where you learn to survive that. It's interesting that their dad was like, go to public school so that you get bullied because that's what makes you tough. But when Eevie is a senior, they transfer to the local public school, and it seems like that's really where they deconstruct a lot of their internalized homophobia. And I don't know if that's age or the situation, but I find it very interesting that they were less comfortable and felt more ashamed going to like this special private performing arts school where a lot of people were bisexual and gay. They were much more comfortable at the public school where they were like, yeah, there was a lot less gay people and it was a lot tougher, but I found myself quicker.
Yeah, there was this kind of rush to own their identity there. Whereas I think at the private school,
feeling less fortunate than the other kids was a bigger obstacle to having Eevie find themselves. Eevie says about their own understanding of their sexuality that they didn't realize they were gay until they were older, because when they were young, of course, they were always attracted to boys, but they would like fool around with boys and stuff in this way that straight boys were also fooling around back with Eevie. So they were kind of like, well, we're all just hooking up, but I'm sure eventually the girl attraction will kick in. And it wasn't until later that they were like, oh, no, I want to date a man.
Yeah.
And those guys were just like kissing for fun.
At some point, a person realizes they're not quite like everyone else. That difference may be their sexuality or their gender or both. And for kids, and really for anyone, being different is the last thing they want. Being different makes them stand out, and standing out can lead to bullying, ostracism, and discrimination. So this is when Eevie is starting to realize that they are not like every other kid. Eevie was raised in a fairly religious family. Messages that your sexuality is a deviance brought on by unseen evil powers can be an enormous burden to carry. Shame informed my identity, Eevie says, not even just sexually, but learning how to navigate the world as a mixed race, gender queer, generally queer adult. And this is a lot about like the masking that took place, just wanting to fit in. Eventually, Eevie progressed through high school and they started to come to terms with their identity. There was this actual embracing of being like, yes, okay, this is who I am. So Evie's friend group, everybody came out as bisexual.
All 5 of them.
All 5 of them, the entire friend group. And I think Eevie was the last one to do it. And it was mainly because there was a boy that Eevie liked that then came out as bisexual. And Eevie was like, oh, if I come out, then maybe we could date. But it turns out that boy liked someone else.
Getting rejected the good old-fashioned style, just for who you are on the inside. Sadly, coming out doesn't make everything better. It's like taking the lid off a boiling pot. Sure, it stops the steam from blowing out the sides, but it doesn't stop the water from boiling. Eevie says, like, I thought, okay, I'm going to have sex and have fun, but eventually I'll settle down with a wife and kids.
Yeah. I didn't want my friends to treat me like I was gay because I started coming out to friends. I would have very serious conversations with them. I'd be like, yes, I'm bisexual, but I'm afraid to tell people because I don't want anyone to treat me differently.
What they really did not want is for somebody to be like, oh my God, you're my new gay BFF. Let's go shopping. Let's talk about boys.
Yeah. And there also was just a lot of internalized homophobia that they talk about later. Meeting someone who was just like sort of effeminate. I remember being disgusted by him and he was so attracted to me. But after coming out and realizing who I was, or at least starting to, he was in the year of first kisses and he wanted to sleep with me. I could have had the experience I'd dreamed of. He was really gorgeous, but he was too gay for me.
Parts of this book I found so good and so interesting because Eevie really is very honest about certain aspects of their life that I think a lot of people are not honest about, like the experience of becoming famous, the experience of dealing with fans. But then there's these parts of the books that are written like, one way people's internalized homophobia manifests can be something called toxic masculinity. This feels like it needs a definition, so we will turn to Wikipedia. I'm sorry, why are we turning to Wikipedia? Like, turn to a fucking dictionary, turn to a paper.
Yeah.
I felt like turning to Wikipedia for a definition was like a very bizarre thing to do in a book.
And then backing up and talking about Dawn again, how Dawn was extremely homophobic and cruel. Dawn's overt homophobic beliefs impacted them. There is no love lost between Eevee and Dawn, it's fair to say. But Dawn's historical behavior impacted Eevee as they started to explore their sexual orientation, whether Eevee liked it or not. My mom knew, my dad knew, and then within the year after that, basically everyone in my life knew. My mom was like, I love you no matter what, but you're going to hell still, and it's not your fault. Some people are just born to go to hell.
And then like Eevee tells their grandfather, and their grandfather's like, okay, well, don't tell your Nana. She can't handle it. And he's like, even when people were saying they love me, he's like, I never got kicked out on the street. I was never turned away. But there was still so much shame there. And then the author goes, let's unpack this, because this is another one of those important character defining plot points, Eevee and authority. We need to look at this because it's something that has come up in Eevee's public life, including their time on Drag Race. The simple truth is that Eevee has issues with authority figures. Something about the way this book is written reminds me of how like a textbook for children would be written, but disguised as a novel.
Yeah, it was very interesting because I also don't feel like this ever really came back.
Yeah, there's not a lot of talk of authority problems later, actually.
Yeah.
Now that we think about it, interestingly enough, even though you took the time to specifically say, let's unpack this. It's interesting to write a book and then in the middle of the book be like, by the way, the subtext here is this. The points that you should be getting from this narrative are X, Y, Z.
Well, it feels for the TikTok generation.
Maybe.
So eventually, Jovan starts exploring like their expression and the way they dress and the way they express themselves as a queer person. In the women's section, you could get a blouse, and it was just revealing enough to make your teacher pull you out of class. So little Jovan evolved from his internalized homophobia into queer with a capital Q. This is what's referred to as context because it's the evolution of how Jovan became Eevee. Okay.
In this section, Eevee also gets into their sexuality and their gender expression, and they are like fluid, very fluid. They accept all pronouns, but then also later in the book, they're like, I don't know. I don't think female, male, non-binary, I don't think any of it feels right. Like I sometimes want to express myself as non-human altogether. They also say they don't identify as gay or bisexual because the bits and the bobs, they say, doesn't really matter. What the fuck is a real man? It's hard for me to even describe myself as gay anymore because I'm like, you don't have to have the same bits and bobbits as me. I thought I was bisexual for the longest of times. Now I'm queer-leaning gay, gay for straight people, queer for people who get it.
For the first time in my life, it felt good to be feminine. All the traits I'd associated with bad that people had told me were weird that I should stop doing as a kid, playing with dolls, crossing your legs, the limpness of the wrists were all things I could be celebrated for. So in a way, it was all exploring my gender identity. But honestly, what really did chip away at that shame truly was drag.
In the intro, they talk about how they identify as trans, but they also don't take that label on because they understand that that label refers to something very specific in our society. But they're like, when I do drag, to me, that's not like putting on a costume. That is like representing a part of my gender identity. And in that way, I am transitioning into myself, like other parts of myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very complex.
For Eevee, the foray into drag started as part of their coming out as LGBTQIA+ and exploring their gender.
It was within my first year of being out that I started drag. I fell in love with it and saw it as this secret way to express the girly parts of me that I had always had. To get to play dressed up in my little sister's clothes, my mom's makeup and heels. So there was the first initial thought of doing drag would be fun.
So then, Valentine's Day 2012, my school was putting on a show and Venus D. Light was going to be there, and I was officially going to do drag in public.
So they leave the house in full drag.
In full drag makeup, no costume, and they had to buy a costume on the way to school.
Yeah, they like went to the Ross store across the street to buy something. But they were like, this, looking back, was kind of a crazy way to enter into the world of drag because it's one thing to do it in the context of like a bar, a drag show, but to just like walk around the streets for your first time fully in drag is quite brave. It was such a terrifying day, especially because I didn't realize how traumatic it was to jump from no drag into doing daytime drag, going to my classes, walking around campus in drag. I just kicked the door open, and all those fears also fed me because it felt like I was in control of the eyes on me. There's the same concept that I have been playing with for a while of dressing up, of dressing out to intentionally attract attention instead of them looking at me because I was naturally a little bit gay or a little bit funny looking. It was embracing it and being like, yes, I am wearing an entirely see-through outfit, and yes, I do have my nails painted. It was very intentional.
I'm going to fuck up your visual day. And if you're looking at me because I'm weird, it's because I chose it. Venus remembers this day and remembers Eevee specifically and said, I see really great things for you in the future. Something big is coming for you. It feels to me like Eevee has a absolutely magnetic presence.
Well, I think like they really commit in a level that is unusual.
But I also think later in terms of relationships and friendships and things like that, the way that the ghostwriter will kind of chime in with like, this may seem like it's being a bad friend, but that's just how Eevee expresses themselves. I think that that is kind of a trait of very magnetic people where you're like, why am I frustrated with how things are happening, but I'll never abandon you?
Yeah, it's true. Star power, they call it. And
Exactly.
apparently a lot of people recognized it right off the bat in Eevee. So they do a song, Sheeb, which is German for fuck, by Lady Gaga from Born This Way. I chose it because it was dancey and fun and it felt gay. And they came to start doing their signature move, which is a backflip in heels, which is something they were doing like out the gate.
A backflip in heels. Can you imagine?
Every time they talked about doing a backflip in heels, I like imagined ankles breaking and I had to stop visualizing it. And I'm excited to like look up the videos later. But it did make me nervous because, you know, I have nothing but respect for backflips. So to do backflips in such a dangerous way, I was just like,
be careful.
And like every day, I mean, we know what happens to people who do backflips beyond what the physical body can sustain. And ask Jason Derulo how it went.
Concussed.
Back broken.
Oh, yeah.
He broke his whole back.
You know what? I totally forgot about Jason Derulo breaking his whole back.
The number one thing that I got from that book was that he drinks salmon smoothies. It's hard to be more interesting and disgusting and horrific than a salmon smoothie.
The school drag show, it was basically one big shit show. If I look back on it now, my wig fell off, my Ross dress was getting caught in my heels, and for some reason I felt like my outfit wasn't complete unless I was also wearing pants. But it still like went well. When you look back on it professionally, you're like, what the hell was that? But in the moment, Eevie got this like huge burst of confidence, truly felt at home and correct. I left thinking, I have to do this seriously now.
At the time, Eevie still wasn't quite Eevie. At first, she performed under Avon LaRue, and that was like a whole pun on one. Avon is the similar letters to Javon, which is their original name, and then also LaRue. They were wearing a red dress and wore a red wig, and then also LaRue is French for like somebody who lives on the streets, and then also Avon is like a makeup company, and they were like, there was just so many layers to it, but yet
it just didn't fit.
So later they upgraded to
Eve Avon
because they still liked Avon. And they like that Eve was the first woman, but then also Eve is like when it gets dark at night. And she was like, I have a dark woman in me.
Many layers.
And then eventually they became Yvie Oddly because they kept the Eve.
Anyway, so the first year of drag competing, they were on the Denver circuit. My first year of drag was sneaking into this one club because they were under 21. So they were still sneaking into clubs, going to these random drag shows that they could get into. A lot of it was just hitting the ground running on the competition circuit.
She also knew she couldn't sew, so she had to get really into getting crafty. So they got really good at gluing things together and going to Goodwill and beg, buy, borrowing, stealing the best versions of the thing that she wanted to create.
At this point in Eevie's journey, they were still nowhere near superstardom, let alone actually being Eevie. Many queens go through a process of developing. It can be a long road from the first moment in drag to a recognizable drag star. The bedroom queens who arrive on Drag Race with 6 months experience, having never been on a stage, are a rarity. And I think this is an important explanation and distinction because I think that a lot of people see high level performance and they think that's the only version of that performance, but it's not. It reminded me a lot of stand up where people...
There were so many parallels to me for stand up.
Yeah, I think people will see like, remember what's that Next Top Stand Up or whatever, America's Best...
Next Tops.
How did we find Amy Schumer on America's Next Top Stand Up? Anyway, a lot of people see those shows and they're like, yeah, it's these great amateur comedians. And then once you start doing stand-up, you're like, oh, those are headliners who are now headlining more. Eevie around town kind of had an it factor early on. One of the big obstacles was, one, having not really refined the act, and two, being underage.
She beat that second one pretty quickly by just
aging.
And then also people don't really care. You show up in drag and you're like, oh no, my ID's in my other wallet. Nobody really is asking you about it.
Yeah. In that last year as Avon Eve, I did all the little competitions around Denver, specifically with the intent of getting better, looking better, and performing better for those people. In the spring of 2015, Avon Eve retired and Yvie Oddly was officially born, and the audience ate it up. Whatever I was doing at that time really struck a chord with people.
So she was doing a very different kind of drag than was big at the time. This would have been in 2015, about 10 years ago, basically. And what was really in her community specifically was like being like kind of a pretty pageant girl drag queen. And the name of the game was how cis could you look, essentially? Like how much could you really look like a woman? Whereas Eevie was doing much more conceptual, performative, weirdo shit. Like her whole thing was, I'm a little weirdo out here.
Yeah. At one point, they made a whole costume out of chewed gum. They spent weeks making all their friends chew a ton of gum to turn the gum into a costume. There was a lot of really random, kooky outfits. There was also a very standard structure within the drag community. These houses and families came onto the scene.
It's like where the word mother comes from.
Yeah. So there would be these drag veterans who would kind of adopt younger drag performers and have these families of drag performers. And Eevie got kind of recruited to a few different houses and decided to remain independent. My family caused me so much stress and anxiety. Now I'm a free gay adult. And yes, I do want to learn about this world, but I didn't want to have to be answering to a mother. I don't want to get into a fight with more sisters.
She also starts honing in on her conceptual queen brand. I think I was trying to disassociate from being human at all. Since I could be a boy or be a girl, what's next? What's more? And I fell in love with taking my old artistry and putting it into my new artistry. Having these alien creatures or gorgeous women or just strange materials used for outfits and makeup. And so that's where my birth of conceptualism came from, wanting to push the envelopes of what self-expression could be because male and female still didn't feel quite right.
For Eevie, drag was a calling, starting with the early days of Drag Race airing long before Ru girls were going on international tours and appearing in commercials with Cardi B. Historically, drag queens performed in gay bars, often working for tips and a bar tab. I just want to say one thing. I know we've been critical of the here's how to aspect of this book. But one thing, because you and I are not consistent drag viewers, I think some of the explanations were extremely helpful.
No, there's a lot of definitions. This book does not at all take for granted that you're like a big RuPaul Drag Race super fan, as the author is. And they explain a lot of the history and background and stuff. And I felt very caught up. And I actually did notice that and appreciate it.
Yeah.
It almost made me wonder if I'm like, did you give this book to your uncle and be like, underline every word you don't understand?
Yeah.
Because truly, every time I was like, oh, I don't really know what exactly that means, they kind of circle back and describe it.
Yeah.
Something interesting she also talks about now, she says, all these years later, I feel like I've come to terms with my own gender identity and how I choose to express on any given day. And because of that, she feels less compelled to push the envelope on gender expression in drag because she feels more comfortable in herself day to day. And she also says, because I'm no longer doing these one-off nights every 6 weeks. I'm performing 6 nights a week and I just do not have what it takes to come up with a huge conceptual, shocking element fresh every night. I wish my brain could still work like it used to, but it's a little different when you're planning for 6 shows a week versus 1 show a month. I find the frankness about what you can do as a performer every day so interesting because it's true. That's the thing about live performance is it is physically live. And I remember reading this interview with Ali Wong about stand-up. And she's like, the thing about stand-up is you're putting your body somewhere specific every night. And that's where you can perform, is where your body is right now. And to see, especially somebody with a chronic illness like Eevie, talk about the change and impact of becoming a successful performer on the performance itself. Mm-hmm. I just found it very interesting to hear it discussed candidly.
Me too. I thought that it was really well done. I think this book gets really interesting in the conversations about success and what it means to find success as a performer.
Yeah.
It felt good to know that you're good at something, even if other people don't feel that way. It gave me everything in one place. Before, it felt like I had to choose an art form even in my adult life. I'd been working on paintings for a while, and then I'd do a theater production. Drag was the one place where it was all everything in one.
Her initial instinct was to make people shocked when she was on stage, and now she says the shock remains today. Eevie continues to do provocative things that challenge people. And then she's like, one of my big new numbers is I get naked down to my skivvies and it looks like I'm swinging around a big erect dick. And she says, I know it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to have to challenge the idea that this drag persona they admire is also still a sexual human being. I do question if that's what's shocking.
Yeah.
I guess there's no doubt in my mind that Yvie Oddly is fucking. Yeah. I think what would be crazy is seeing a giant dick when you didn't know you were about to.
Totally. So then it's time for RuPaul's Drag Race. And again, a thing that I really like is that while obviously RuPaul's Drag Race is the reason this book is out and the reason we know Yvie Oddly's name, I feel like there is a real point made that this isn't the only route to success in drag, even though it is the most known route to success. Because I think that people get very caught up in thinking there's only one path to do things.
Yeah.
And I feel like this book takes great care in being like, this is how I got to where I am today. If you don't get on RuPaul's Drag Race, you're not going to be what you want to be in life.
It's also very much this is one path, and also it's very much not the destination.
Yeah, it's not the destination, and it's not without its bumps.
So she starts talking about her audition to be on RuPaul. And she says RuPaul's Drag Race has been called the Olympics of drag by RuPaul, of course. And it sort of is, but it sort of isn't. And basically she's like, listen, they're not picking the best drag performer in the world because that is A, subjective, but also B, because first and foremost, it's a reality TV show where the narrative revolves around a drag competition. But what they want in somebody on that show is somebody who's going to make good TV. And that comes first before the actual pitting of performance against each other.
And there's so much that goes into making good TV. There's one, is that specific person going to be good TV? Like, is there other cast members that they could have friction or compatibility with? There's so many moving parts to consider when you're being cast in a reality TV show.
So she starts applying, and a lot of people say that she doesn't have a chance because RuPaul famously hates Denver for some reason. What a random thing to hate.
I guess I don't know for sure if RuPaul hates Denver, but this was making me think a lot about like JFL with Just for Laughs New Faces, which is a big achievement in comedy.
True, that there's some real there's feeder cities.
There's feeder cities. There's cities where, because Eevie does mention
how hard it is to come up if you're not New York, LA, or Chicago.
Yes, because those are cities with major drag scenes. You can get a really major social following from it. Having that major social following helps you get more attention from Drag Race producers. There is just better opportunity to rise to the like JV level in those cities and then eventually get a chance at Drag Race.
It's like getting into a college from private school.
Exactly.
When your college admissions counselor has a relationship with the casting director and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So I think that maybe RuPaul doesn't hate Denver so much as like with Just for Laughs, the roster is usually like 40% LA, 40% New York, and then a couple people, like one person from Atlanta, Chicago, Denver. Being that one person is just harder.
So she starts trying to audition for season 9 and she gets the list of requirements. They basically want to see you act out one of each type of challenge. And she didn't really see that coming. So she's scrambling to put it together. Then she also says, basically, anytime it came to a performance where I knew the camera was on me, I got choked up and nervous and just inauthentic. It was painful to watch. And she's like, there's still parts of it that I was really proud of, but I myself was not coming across. And I wasn't super strong in every arena.
So then the second year comes around and Eevie decides, okay, I'm going to go in with character ideas beforehand and actually tackle these challenges instead of being just like, yeah, here it is, which does sound like a better way to audition.
And things get better. She gets a rejection email. She had not gotten a rejection email the first time.
Yes. And so then the third season comes along, season 11. Eevie took an entirely different approach to creating their audition tape. Rather than following the same format, they approached the audition like it was a short film and they did it all by themselves. This is interesting. That's a really good idea.
So they're like, I learned how to edit. It's just, she talks about the difference of being someone interesting in real life and then how to be authentic specifically for the camera. And she's like, you can't just answer the interview questions. You have to embody who you always are, which is such a tricky skill. And I think the way that Eevie acknowledges that being authentic and then being authentic in a way that reads for the camera are two different things, and they are a learned skill. It's just like anything else. You could be good at a job, but are you good at the interview for the job? So she approaches it this new way, learns how to talk the way that she would normally talk in conversation, but translated for interview questions.
The audition tape had a clear statement. Yes, I'm not the best. I'm not the cleanest. I'm not the prettiest. Not always going to do the most predictable shit, but I'm so passionate about following these weird artistic dreams, and I'm just doing it honestly. I think it's very interesting that Eevie has a real problem with complimenting themselves with beauty standards.
I will say, and something I'm excited to talk to them about is, I mean, this all happened so fast for them and they were so young. And now I think they're like 30. They might have had time to process. I'm sure this book writing was very therapeutic. They're much more stable in their career. It all kind of came wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. But their insecurities are so specific and loud.
Yeah.
So then she gets into how there's one other drag queen in the scene named Jessica Lahore. And everybody's like, oh, it's going to be her, not you. And she, to this day, I think is a little bit like, why do you think they're better than me? And I think it just had to do with seniority.
I was doing bigger and better things in my drag career in Denver. I'd performed at Red Rocks in Morrison, Colorado. I had my own show up and running. I was judging Ultimate Queen, which is the first big competition that Eevie had won. All of these things to distract myself from the fact that I felt like this could be my time for Drag Race. And then I got the call.
Then they get the call and they're like, tell us more about you. Because we had an hour-long conversation. In that hour, I'm like, yeah, I'm a weirdo, child abuse, and also I like alien stuff. And also I always felt ostracized sexually for this, which is why I became a drag queen. And that was it. A few weeks later, on a random rainy day, Eevie got the call from WoW producer to let them know Eevie would be part of the cast of RuPaul's Drag Race season 11. I find it so interesting that RuPaul's book was so like, I don't look back. I don't dwell in the past. I don't want to talk about my trauma. I'm not traumatized. Nothing bad ever happened to me. But then to get onto RuPaul's show, they're like, well, do you have trauma?
Well, we don't really watch RuPaul's Drag Race. Every time I've watched it, I've been like, oh, that's an amazing show. It just has never really been a regular show that I've watched. We should watch Eevee season for the Patreon.
Yes.
But I've heard there's like a trauma corner where they have to disclose their trauma on camera for entertainment.
There is like definitely RuPaul shade in this book.
Oh, yeah. They had spent 6 years honing their craft and developing their drag with the objective of getting on the world's biggest drag platform, and they were finally there. The most important part of the moment was that Eevee felt seen. I think some of the shade towards RuPaul comes from drag is a form of performance and art that is deeply personal to the performers. I mean, imagine if there was really only one mega platform for stand-up. I think there'd be a lot of resentment towards the gatekeeper of that platform because it's just like, well, who are you to be the only person?
Mm-hmm.
There are so many people in the world who associate drag with RuPaul specifically. And I think if I was a drag queen, I understand being a little bit like, okay, well, it's also like a whole other thing.
Yeah. 2.5 weeks. That's how long Eevie had to prepare. From that call from the unknown World of Wonder producer on that rainy day to getting on the plane to fly to Los Angeles to film season 11, Eevie had a total of 2.5 weeks to prepare. So then they go through this whole thing like, can you believe it? And basically, you were like sworn to secrecy, and Eevie took that very seriously. But then they were like, okay, but if I only have 2 weeks to get it together, to bring on all my costumes, and they give you like general outlines of what the challenges will be, but nothing specific. But you have to bring all of your costumes and props and ideas and outfits and makeup and wigs and everything. And so Eevie calls in all the favors that they can as discreetly as they can. Anybody they've ever modeled for, anybody they know that became a fashion designer. The bar Eevie worked at, which is Trax, like the only gay bar in Denver at the time, it sounds like, gave her $7,000 as like an advance to be like, good luck. We know you need help, which I think was a really sweet thing. And their community really rallied around them.
Yeah, I think that was really sweet. Eevie's able to use those $7,000 to put together a bunch of different costumes and a bunch of different concepts.
So they explain this for 2 pages. And then the author goes, let's take a breath and recap, because that was a lot of information covering a short period of time. Eevie had 2.5 weeks to prepare for the biggest opportunity of their life to date. By their own admission, Eevie's drag wasn't really television ready at that point. The tutu made of chewing gum and cigarette dress were not going to read well on the main stage. So Eevie wasn't really able to pull something from their closet that would potentially fit the brief, unlike some of the other queens.
I guess I found this chapter actually
Tedious because it's recaps of like episode by episode.
Yeah. And I don't think any of that is necessarily that crucial.
What I find interesting is that in the intro, Eevie's like, you know, this isn't just a RuPaul's Drag Race tell-all because I'm much more interesting than just that chapter of my life. And then we get to this chapter and I'm like, no, yeah, you're right. This is kind of the least interesting chapter.
Yeah.
There is something about recapping reality TV, which I guess is par for the course in any reality TV book, but we see it in The Housewives, we see it in VPR. Either we've watched the show and we know, or we didn't watch the show and hearing you recap a TV show is boring.
Yeah, I think the things that I found interesting were kind of the explanations of the culture and style of Drag Race, where Eevie talks about the different types of queens and how their season was a lot of pageant queens. So even though it was racially diverse, it was drag queen style, not diverse at all. So people would look at the season and say, well, that's the most diverse season yet. But really, when you look at the style of drag queen, it was not a very diverse season at all. So Eevie felt confident in saying, well, I'm not a filler queen because, and again, explaining filler queens, people that were on the show just because they have to have a certain amount of people on the show, but these weren't the storyline drivers that the producers expected to last a long time. Eevie felt confident that they were not a filler queen because they were a different type of queen than most of the other people on that season. So I guess when they talked to the other people who were on that season, it felt obvious to a lot of people that Eevie was a contender, because why else would they be there if not to like bring a separate kind of vibe that obviously the producers wanted around. I also found this part interesting. A lot of contestants spend really varying amounts of money preparing for their time on Drag Race. I think this would be interesting to Drag Race fans.
Trixie Mattel spent $600 preparing, but then other drag queens have spent upwards of like
$20,000 preparing.
And she was saying one of the advantages of being a pageant girl is basically that you're coming from this world where you're expected to have, I assume, nightwear, bikini wear. So you come with these outfits that you've already put all this work into that are at a certain level, that are fitting into a certain aesthetic that then is quite beneficial for the RuPaul's Drag Race aesthetic. Whereas Eevie was doing these more grungy, smaller performance conceptual ideas. If she had gotten it year 15 of her life, she probably would have had a lot more to pull from. I guess pageants have a certain expectation of like fanciness. And fancy translates better on TV.
I also think Eevie was doing these conceptual outfits that didn't quite hold up via travel and time, like the cigarette butt outfit and the chewing gum outfit and things like that. Whereas a gown doesn't really
was made to last at least twice.
When you wear a gown, you can keep wearing that gown. When you wear an outfit concocted of cigarette butts, the shelf life is like different. Like Lady Gaga's meat dress, right? That wasn't really one that you can like rewear.
I felt a little disappointed with my season, and I know it sounds like the shadiest thing you can say about a bunch of girls that you shared an experience with and got to know deeply, but that's just how I felt when I looked around. And it's funny because he's like, yeah, I guess we're the blackest season, so that's cool. But as Ashley said, we didn't have that many drag representation types. And then they go into all the different first. Mercedes was the very first Muslim queen on the show. Plastique was the very first and only Vietnamese queen. Brooklyn was the first Canadian. Is that a big deal? Canada has their own show. Kahana had a Las Vegas showgirl thing going on. Soju was only the second Korean queen to be on the show and the first to share with the world about their exploding cyst. Okay, I feel like you were really just digging for things. I guess I'm the first Claire on this show.
I'm the first Ashley. Looking across the cast, Eevee stood out, but not in the way they wanted to. Season 11's cast was made up of two distinct groups, pageant queens and social media queens. It was 10 out of 15. Social media queens who were like very much online favorites. That was another 3. And so then it was just Sugarcane and Eevee were the only ones who were just kind of
had come up just doing drag performance. She also felt very alienated from the other girls. She says they all had like a sisterhood, but she was not included because of the pageant and the social media contacts. They all had already known each other. Detox let me borrow this. And oh, Alexis gave me her guy for that. I'm competing against a literal fucking meme. Miss Vanjie, in the prime of Miss Vanjie-dom. Eevee may not have thought that they were a filler queen, but that didn't mean that they were feeling overly confident. The closest between the other contestants left Eevee feeling excluded, regardless of whether it was a deliberate or not.
Well, there's a lot of self-doubt and imposter syndrome that starts to creep in, and I think that Eevee projects a lot of judgment.
So one of the challenges is you have to use somebody else's trunk to make a costume out of, and she gets Alaska's, which is, I guess, the garbage, like literal garbage. And she's like, oh, so you think I'm a garbage person? The queen who like divvied it up, she was just like, I don't know. I think I gave everyone what was closest to them. It really was not personal. I didn't know them at all.
Yeah, that's what I mean is I think that Eevee has like a lot of tension and takes certain things in the worst way. I think that comes from being young.
Lonely is the word Eevee uses to describe their time on Drag Race. As they explain it, I pride myself on being very independent, but the dynamic I had with the cast was that most of us were not on good terms. And even if we were, it's not like anyone would ever have my back when I was just popping off. Put together the feeling of loneliness, exclusion, and add the imposter syndrome and insecurity, combined with everything we already know about Eevee's personality, and it starts to explain the behavior that we saw from Eevee, the shadiness, the arguments, the aggression, the fights. In retrospect, it's no wonder they acted the way they did. Which is interesting because then they go on to be like, the other queens are like, well, they edited it worse for us. Like Eevee would pick at all of us, then we would pick back at Eevee, and then Eevee would explode, but they would edit it like we just started this fight.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We're going to have to watch and see how she comes across.
Eevee was bothered by how contestants presented themselves in front of the camera versus how they acted when the cameras weren't going. But that goes both ways, as Silky explains. I just didn't know when Eevee was being genuine or when they were playing a character.
I think one of the most immature qualities a person can have, and I say this as somebody who like saw myself a lot in this and like has this problem, is being like, you're not being authentic. You're not saying in front of a camera what you would say quietly to a friend. But at some point you have to grow up and realize like, yeah, you
Lala
can't.
Kent.
But I mean, there really is like, you have to fucking, and I mean this about myself, like there are different places where it's appropriate to say things, and that doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. There's being authentic and vulnerable in your artwork, but there is no reason to go into a confessional and be like, I hate that bitch because she's ugly. That actually isn't advantageous, especially when you're on a TV show, especially when you're trying to do your career. Like at some point you do have to consider people's feelings and like your own future. I really think that it is something that you have to grow out of. I mean, how many ex-boyfriends so casually cruel in the name of being honest? This idea that it's authenticity above all else.
Oh, yeah.
Is such a childish outlook. I only say that as somebody who has also been like, I don't know, why'd you go into that board meeting and shake everybody's hand when I know you think shaking hands is stupid? Like, grow up. be authentic when it's time to perform, but you do not always have to be sharing deep secrets and deep thoughts about other people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that Eevee later in this book kind of regrets some of the ways that they acted and admits and discusses that a lot of it came from just stress and fear, which I think makes sense. It feels very Holly Madison disease, where they were very stressed and kind of lashing out and not really considering that everyone in the room is stressed and freaking out.
Yeah, and then Eevee's also like, well, they were saying really personally mean things about me, and the only mean thing I said about anybody was that Silky wasn't talented.
That's a really mean thing to say on a talent show. Eevee felt like they were being real, but they were also playing a game. I wasn't being mean. I was making TV. It's constructed reality. As stressful as it may have been, Drag Race fed into Eevee's creative soul. It was an opportunity to create multiple looks and show their artistry to the world.
On the other hand, this is where Eevee's chronic illness actually starts to flare up, and they start to realize that their body is not like everybody else's. It was the first place where I was like, oh my God, I actually am physically too weak for this.
Yeah, so Eevee has had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome for their entire life. There was some conversation earlier in the book about when they were younger, they were in a lot of pain. As they've gotten older, it really comes through when they have a rigorous schedule of performing because it's a very physical experience.
Mm-hmm. Especially the way that Eevee performs specifically. They are very acrobatic. They're doing backflips and heels, as we've said. I mean, that's tough for even somebody with the stiffest of ankles, let alone a loosey-goose.
Drag Race was literally the beginning of my adult body finally reconciling with the fact that I'm not like everybody else. I could vaguely work like everybody else. I could vaguely party like everyone else. And yeah, sure, I'd go home and take a nap or whatever, but I could keep up. Drag Race was the first place where I was like, oh God, I'm physically too weak for this.
Then the way Drag Race films is they film up till the final 4, and then everybody goes home for 6 months and has to be dead silent. You can't tell anybody how you did. You can't even tell anybody you were on it.
Well, everyone knows you're on it because you're a part of the drag community and you disappeared during the exact months of filming Drag Race.
And then actually Eevee keeps being like, plus Reddit knows everything. They have all the tea. And I'm like, do not give Reddit that kind of credit.
They don't know fucking anything.
And then also to get back and now know that I possibly have no genuine friends back home anymore, that even though my family doesn't know it now, their relationship is going to change with me and people are always going to want something from me now. And I had that panic attack midway between being so thankful to see everyone and looking around and hearing them make little jokes. Like, oh, Eevee's famous now. Yeah, we're going to get free meat boxes and vacations. I had a hard time with this section. I think it's really unfair to put on your friends and family, especially your friends and family who rallied around you.
Yeah.
Like, the people who loaned you money, who came together for weeks getting you all the clothes to help you prepare, to turn around and be like, well, I guess they're not my real friends anymore. They just want something. I don't know. I think you have to give people a chance before you assume the worst. Because I mean, this is a person who just came from Drag Race where they did not bond with their cast. They are now coming home and saying, nobody I've known up until the show will be an authentic friend to me anymore, which is like,
not true because they were your friend when you weren't successful.
Also, okay, maybe 1 or 2 people start acting different, but to just like blanket statement, think that not one person can withstand Drag Race success feels kind of crazy. And then also be like, and now I'll never be able to make a new friend because they'll just want something from me.
Yeah, I also think that there is this thing about success, especially when you rocket to success overnight, but like any kind of emergence into struggling artistship versus successful artistship, it takes you personally time to figure yourself out in that new role. So it's allowed to take people in your life a little bit more time to adjust to you in that new role. If someone out the gate does something annoying or offensive or inappropriate, like that doesn't mean they are incapable of engaging with you or behaving as like a friend to you now that you're in this new.
I also do understand and I empathize with the fact that they got success so quick, like truly overnight. And then we get into how Eevee really struggled with the boundaries of fandom and their own success and saying yes and no to different things. And I think like it's more indicative of their own boundaries.
Yeah. I think I'll be interested to hear if they've like kind of reconnected with any people from the original scene.
So right away, they employ their 2 best friends. They had 2 roommates, Morgan and Teeny. And immediately like they become
Team Eevee.
Yeah, Team Eevee. And so I'm like, well, that was your problem being like, we should all have a life that revolves around me.
Yeah.
And I guess Morgan had put a lot of himself into Eevee and helped a lot. And they were like, a lot of the ideas for my conceptual performances came from Morgan. And this was a lot of his baby too. But then Eevee's like, but it was just me. So I don't know. It's very tricky. The boundaries are very tricky. I'd gotten into a few arguments with my closest friends and a few arguments with my family, breaking down to them about how I didn't have time to care about them as much as they care about me, and how the dynamic between a famous person and a not famous person is very annoying because it does exist. And it is set in stone where, unfortunately, as long as my name is in the news, is on TV, is doing things, you're probably going to be thinking about me more than I am thinking about you, which is a hard dynamic to grasp, and which is why it surprises me that Doug loves me at all. Doug is Evie's current husband.
I don't think I agree with that.
I don't agree with that. I do believe that the whirlwind of touching down and suddenly being famous overnight was a crazy 6 months to a year. I do think that they were very, very busy for the first year or so, but then there was a pandemic, and you know what? Bigger things happened almost immediately.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is, I do think a lot of this, if Eevee had just taken a breath and had more faith in the people around them, it could have been something they just girded against.
Yeah. So then they filmed the finale. It's well known they filmed multiple versions of the finale, and the queens give their acceptance speech. They film the finale in front of a live audience, and then everyone films an acceptance speech, or I guess the top 2 film an acceptance speech, and then later they announce who actually won and they air it that way.
Yeah.
Eevee finished the show being like, don't know what happened. Could go any way.
And then interesting enough, the mood was, well, is RuPaul going to let a Black person win? Will a Black queen be able to be crowned? RuPaul's not going to let that happen. Interesting.
Eevee's crowning was less about an exciting turn of events and more about exhaustion. So then Eevee wins. Hurrah.
She finds out in a Levi's flagship store in San Francisco.
And then it's like a whirlwind, go, 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 go.
This is a very funny end. You may think that Eevee would have regrets about their time on Drag Race, but not really. All the things I regret about that season were things that were out of my control because I think they ultimately influenced my entire experience there. I regret not making close sisters and making friends with the girls.
That was kind of in your control. So then Drag Race is over. Eevee is a sensation.
And they hit the road immediately. They're already pre-crowned winner of Drag Race on a cast tour.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets so interesting. So now for the first time, they have the success that they've wanted. I think a part of the human condition is always having these intangible goals, always having this ideal life that's just a little bit better than what you're living right now. But there's so much that comes with the dynamic of even getting on Drag Race that changes your perspective about dreams versus reality. It shows you that when your dreams come true, there's still life to live. And at least for me, there was this dramatic shift in how I felt I was perceived by the world and how I felt I could exist in it. So when I was crowned, I was genuinely thrilled. I obviously wanted this, but there was this emptiness. And this is actually one of the best explanations of why the success doesn't make you happy.
Yeah.
I really am that is so true.
Because you've put all of your energy into one thing, and it turns out life is many pillars.
But then also more than that, life is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, great. You won Drag Race. Guess what? You've got 70 more years.
I thought everything was going to be different, and it was, but in a way that was a lot harder to handle in an overnight fashion than I could have imagined. I felt incapable of handling it all. There was a long period where Tina and Morgan were taking care of the business end. They were handling all the merch sales. They were talking to my managers, answering emails. Okay, so then control becomes an issue. The relationship with Teenie and Morgan starts to expire.
So Morgan was in control of Eevee's social media, which is very dangerous because then Morgan was starting beef with other queens and other just random people online. And even though Eevee does have a lot of fights with people, they're well, if I'm going to fight, it needs to be me. It can't just be someone having random fights on my behalf, which I completely agree with. And then also Morgan was getting jealous of how much attention I was getting, and rightfully so. And then also it seemed like they were using Eevee's Instagram to talk to other guys online. And I'm well, that's inappropriate.
And also to accept babies. Drag children. So Eevee was unknowingly a drag mother to new drag queens.
They were all living together
in a 3-bedroom apartment
with one bathroom.
So the timeline goes like this. May 26th, 2019 was the first performance of the season 11 cast tour. May 30th, 2019 is the announcement that Eevee is the winner.
June, they try to film a TV show with just Eevee called Eevie's Odd School. Eevee hates this experience and is if I were to ever do that again, I need to be in control. They can't just throw me in random things and see what sticks.
Yeah.
That show seems to go nowhere. By July, they're back out on tour. They did something 48 dates in 62 days, which is grueling. If you guys know anything about us, sometimes we do 3 dates in 4 days and we're on our asses and we don't even dance. A lot of our show is sit.
We sit for the majority of the show.
And again, Eevee feels very excluded. A lot of the queens on the cast tour had all been on the road before, so they understood how it worked. It's not like anyone was trying to be exclusive, but once again, I felt like I had no place to fit in and no soul to do anything with. Again, Holly Madison disease. We're all on a bus, but somehow it's the worst for me and it's good for them. Being on a bus sucks for everybody.
And then Eevee has this like creeping doubt about themselves, that people still don't like them, that people don't understand how they won. So then Eevee goes on this Work the World tour after the RuPaul's season 11 tour. For Eevee, Work the World can be described as the still trying to prove why I got crowned tour. This is where the imposter syndrome was running rampant. Now I'm not working to please people half as hard as I'm working to please me, and it seems to be pleasing the people. So then there's a Vegas residency that gets announced. RuPaul is going to have this RuPaul's Drag Race Live in Las Vegas experience that Eevee gets hired on.
And she's so happy because they were sick of the road and they were like, oh, this is as close to a 9-to-5 as you can get doing drag. And I have to say, as somebody who has a podcast, it is such a relief to like have a steady footing.
Yeah. And it is this really exciting creative experience where the queens who get cast on this show are putting together like a drag review.
And they have a writers and they have a musician and they have all this stuff. But pretty soon it seems like it gets very stressful. Like when RuPaul shows up and everybody's like, it has to be good. Obviously, a lot of money is going into it. And it launches. And then guess what happens?
Le pandemique.
Yeah. So everybody moves back home. Eevie at this point had gotten a significant other boyfriend called Doug who had moved to Boston. And they were like, how are we going to do long distance?
They start doing long distance and Eevie's on tour the whole time. So it's not that big of a deal anyway. And then the pandemic hit, so then they're not long distance anyway.
So now they're like extremely not long distance and that they're in lockdown in the same house. And it turns out they love each other. They're having so much fun being locked down. However, when Eevie first moves back to Denver, they move into their old apartment. Everyone now has a significant other. So 6 people are sharing one bathroom and obviously all hell breaks loose.
In a 3-bedroom apartment.
That's not enough space.
It seems like when Eevee sits down to be like, listen, I'm moving out, and Eevee gets a new apartment in the same building, there was a lot of tension. And I was like, did Morgan and Teeny want there to be this many people in one apartment? Also, doing the Las Vegas show, Eevee did bond with the other queens. Doing the tour and the Vegas show were the times that Eevee like finally got to know the other people as like friends and coworkers, which felt better.
Also, it was the first time they were allowed to, because I think on the show, it's very much set up that you don't know who else is there and you're kind of at odds and you're exhausted and you're in competition. So it was the first time they were all just like hanging out in the room.
Yeah. So then when Eevee is starting to feel more comfortable, starting to feel more at ease in this like famous within the drag community, Eevee gets the call about going on All Stars, All Winners and says yes immediately because statistically, there's a lot of conversation about Eevee being one of the least winning winners.
But I don't know how much that is in her head.
I think it's a lot in her head.
And I get that she has haters, but they all do. And like she gets into this whole season and how it wasn't fair because it was like Jinx's season. Jinx probably has haters too.
Yeah. So Eevee feels like this season was built around Jinx and feels that Jinx had like a different contract than everyone else. And just they say that the treatment of Jinx felt very different than the treatment of everyone else.
Because she was the biggest star on the show. I also want to say this was one of the few times I did like that this outside author came in to kind of check and balance Eevee's perception, because they come in and say, you know, Eevee can sit here and say she was the least winningest, but she also is like the least losingest. A lot of the other winners have been in the bottom 2 a bunch. So there are important statistics in determining who was the worst winner and the best winners are. What matters is that Eevee won, but that logic also doesn't take away Eevee's feelings.
So Eevee views ultimate winners as a redemption opportunity. Seems like this season was quite grueling.
She has this idea that this is going to be a showcase situation because they're not in competition. So it's just like challenges and opportunities to show what you can do. She also feels she's grown a lot as a performer in the last year or so. So she like cannot wait to be like, look how much I've grown. Look how much I've changed. I deserve to be the winner. Unfortunately, once she gets there, everything starts changing and she feels like they switch up all of the competition. And it seems like all of the challenges were kind of designed to showcase other people.
I already knew my runways would be iconic, but I needed to prove myself in every challenge that came at me. All in all, Eevee did not love the experience of filming All Stars, All Winners. There were moments where they felt that they were successful, but so many moments that were reinforcing their imposter syndrome.
I mean, she's like, it's not fair because the judges didn't know me as a person and hadn't really been following what I was doing since the last show. And because they hadn't been following how much I've been doing, they didn't understand how to properly showcase me.
I was desperately hoping the producers would do their best to at least make it look like I was there or that I had a chance of even being runner-up. Regardless of what happened, All Stars, All Winners had one thing going for it that the producers couldn't take away from Eevee, a room full of friends. So this time, Eevee bonds a lot better with the cast. Okay, so then this next chapter I found to be one of the more interesting chapters in any celebrity memoir we've ever read.
Agreed.
Yvie and their fans. Yvie has a complex relationship with their fans, and that is commonly referred to as a massive understatement. So Yvie, I guess, famously has shit on their fandom a bit in a way that I think people need to take a fucking seat.
Eevee gets in a lot of trouble because they tweet, imagine that you're a very passionate chef who just landed your dream job at a prestigious restaurant. Imagine that you just spent a long day on your feet cooking for people who pay you because they appreciate how your food tastes. I don't know what got cut out of this, but I assume there's a second half to this tweet that's like, now imagine right after they demand a photo. Because Eevee does not like to take photos after the performance.
Because Eevee is chronically ill and also
Exhausted.
stressed. And also, it seems like just doesn't like the game of I owe you my identity at every point in time.
So basically, another queen, Bianca, is like, good luck, bitch. You are not grateful. And Eevee gets this reputation as being ungrateful for their fans, being like dismissive of their fans, and gets called out a lot for the fact that they like often say no to fans, or if a fan comes up and is rude, they like snap at a fan. But it does seem like overnight they absolutely lose boundaries to their own personhood, and I understand it. They're like, if you come up to me and say, I know this is so annoying, but can I take a photo with you? Don't say that. Like, be annoying or don't, but don't come up here and be like, I recognize that what I'm doing is infringing upon your rights.
Or like of your solitude or your comfort. I don't know. I thought this was a really interesting part because it was about the haters, but also about the lovers having to deal with the public expectations and the public love and not being able to go down the street and eat some ice cream without having somebody tell you how much you've changed their life. I don't think the human ego needs as much attention and stroking in a positive or negative way as it gets when you're on Drag Race.
And then they also say, I'm hobbling outside a show and you're going to give me a fucking sass because you think I'm too good to take a picture with my lowly fans who got me here when you did not fucking get me here. Your support gives me opportunities, but if you don't support me as a human, you can't support me as an artist. And that's what I need to scream out to the people, but maybe not using the best words. I also want to real quick say, by the way, we love it when people come say hi to us. Because we don't have that many fans, so it happens sparingly and we appreciate it every time. But I do understand how every single night they are putting a lot of themselves on the stage and they're tired. And then for people to like never have a boundary, it is a mind fuck.
A phenomenon that's developed in the age of social media is a toxic belief among some fans that celebrities are their property. And this is something that, like, again, when listeners talk to us, I love it. I love when I'm walking down the street, when I have bug and someone says hi, it's so fun. But the other thing is that people do think that they have a right to people they listen to in a very specific way. The way that people will, if they don't want us to cover a certain topic, they'll say like, this is not interesting for me or something. You know what I mean?
Oh, I don't like it when you talk about this. Okay, well, there's like thousands of other people.
There's other people who listen.
I mean, recently I did a TikTok being like, yeah, we'll do bespoke prizes if you donate enough money to the GoFundMe. And then people started listing like every fucked up thing they could ever think that happened to us and being like, give me the episode on this, give me the episode on that. And like truly drudging up like the time that you cried, the time that your friend broke up with you, the time that this awful thing happened. And I was like, oh, wow.
Like I like sharing stuff about my life.
But it's hard then the way that sometimes it can be thrown back to you in this flattened way of entertainment.
Yes.
And I know not everybody is like, oh, it's entertaining to me, but it does get flattened and ultimately
it can be difficult.
Yeah. I kind of like respect that Eevee's talking about it.
Because they're not saying they don't appreciate their fans. They're saying they feel that they deserve a little bit more understanding.
Also, they're saying, I believe that you should not be obsessed with me. Eevee is big about being like, kill your idols. I don't mean literally, but I don't idolize anybody to the extent that like I would stand them. Like there is a difference between someone coming up to you and being like, oh, I love what you do, or like, I really like it, blah, blah, blah. And somebody like getting into that stan frenzy where they like forget that the object of affection is still a human being and not in fact an object.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what they're getting at. Like this culture that's become pervasive of like everybody's a Beatle. There used to be like 5 people in the world were that famous. And now it seems like any micro niche internet celebrity can get like the frenzy. But that's scary.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what Eevee's trying to get at. This idea that they talk about a time that they said no photos after a show, and then a bunch of people followed all of the drag queens back to their hotel and demanded in the lobby for photos. And they are like, I don't know, if I said no, then don't follow me to where I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty reasonable boundary. And they also say, you know, people always say, well, celebrities know what they signed up for. And Eevee's like, that's quite rapey of you to be like, well, the victim knew what they wanted. Like they shouldn't have asked for it then.
Yeah, it is this odd thing of like, of course, I think that when you are looking to have success in a certain field, like lots of people want to make a living doing their art for lots of excited fans. That's a dream. But to say that because you've achieved that or because you are achieving that, you have to open your, like, of course there are downsides to everything, but to say that this is what you deserve and like must put up with.
They also were very upset because a lot of the other drag queens would call Yvie out for it. And Yvie's like, I've been in the green rooms with you guys when I watch you lie to your fans and try to escape. And I think they're very frustrated with the fact that people are acting like that's some unique flaw in Yvie and not that every human being at some point has been like, I can't today, I can't give it today, and then gotten out of things. They just don't do it publicly. So I do respect that Yvie is like taking the heat.
In some way, Yvie is the anti-hero of superstars. They want to interact with their fans and their idols in a way that is humanizing and real. I personally would want to bump into someone on the street, but I wouldn't want to start our interaction with, oh my God, I'm such a big fan. In an ideal world, I want to have something to talk about with Beyonce. Like, oh my God, do you like soup? I like soup. Okay, the thing is, Yvie actually loves soup.
Yeah.
I guess it is hard to say, like, from the perspective of someone who's now achieved fame, this is how you should talk to a fan. Like, I don't know, man.
It's funny to be like, why would you want to tell your favorite artist that you love their work when you could just become their friend? Well, a lot of people can't be their friend, so.
And also, it is nice as someone who puts creative stuff out there to have people say that they liked it.
Yeah. And then they get into Katya and Trixie Mattel, I guess, put out a book where they criticized Yvie for having kind of a cheap looking outfit at some drag con. And they were like, you're the winner of season 11. You need to step it up a little bit. You can stay true to who you are, but there needs to be a polish. And Yvie's very offended by this. Now that I'm thinking about it, I have a distillation.
Okay.
Because obviously, as we've said, we're not super familiar with the drag world, but it does seem like there's a lot of opportunity to be petty and have like beefs. And it reminds me a lot of like Bravo and Vanderpump Rules and Real Housewives shows. And I think the struggle Yvie has is the crossover of mediums in that they think of themselves and they are a drag artist, but unfortunately they achieved fame through reality TV.
Yes.
And I think in the way that they understood that it's not about being the best drag performer, it's about being the best drag performer for this reality TV show. The kind of fame that they're feeling is the fame of reality stars, which are people who did kind of sign up to have their whole lives be given over to the fans and who kind of want their whole lives to be given over to the fans. The Sheena Shays of the world, the Lala Kents, who are like, consume me, I am but a muse.
Not to keep putting ourselves in the book, but I think that's something we struggle with social media.
Yes, I want to be a stand-up comedian that performs for millions, but I don't actually want to be known by millions as like a person of interest.
Right. And so I like podcasting a lot. I love doing this podcast. And so we are stand-up comedians and podcasters who to some people cross over as influencers because they found us from social media. Mm-hmm. So they consume our lives like they can influencers' lives.
And that is really hard for me because that's not really what I want at all.
No, and that's not what we want to share. And that's not how we identify.
And it's the game you have to play, I think, right now as like a modern artist of how do you feed the fame monster so that you can get the platform so that you can do your art.
Yes.
And I think that is something that Yvie is very much struggling with, having won the game of that platform, I think.
And then to keep being kind of thrust back in to say like, okay, I stepped up using this set of stairs and now I'd like to express myself through like my art. But people are saying, no, you're part of this reality show community.
Yeah.
Come back.
For Yvie, things with the fans have somewhat improved, largely because Yvie now has a better sense of who they are and what they can and cannot give. I am no longer in a place where I feel like I have no space and no time and no me for myself. So I can indulge somebody's selfishness and I can indulge somebody who wants to take a photo with this superstar that they never thought existed out in the world.
So then we get into Yvie's relationship history.
It opens with the craziest sentence I've ever read. It starts with, relationships are hard at the best of times.
I don't know that that's always true.
I actually specifically think if your relationship is hard at best, then you're in a bad relationship.
What are you, Lindsay and Carl?
At the best of times, a relationship should be like one of the great joys of your life.
So Yvie, as they were coming out, as they were discovering their sexuality, there weren't a lot of relationships. And then Yvie got their first boyfriend, but it was someone they couldn't really be themselves around fully. They were scared to talk about their drag.
Can I say something actually about their early relationships? They talk about it in high school, how I had this bitter mindset of, damn, I'm always going to be the leftovers. And the leftovers were how they identified and who the people they dated identified. Like Yvie identifies the people they dated as leftovers, i.e. the people the popular people didn't want to date. And I'm like, okay, If I dated someone and I found out they were like, well, we had to date each other and nobody else wanted us, I'd be like, hurtful.
I thought we liked each other.
Keep your insecurities to yourself. You can feel like shit about you, but like,
I thought I looked good. Anyway, Eevie gets a boyfriend.
Andrew's nice, but
Evie's afraid to really be their whole self with Andrew. What Eevie is doing is called editing. It's where you take a piece of your identity and hide it away from your respective other. So in the time between filming Drag Race and Drag Race premiering, Eevie meets Doug. I was caught off guard by this message on Grindr in the middle of the night where Doug was just like charming and sweet.
The message ends up being like, when you want to be respectful, but you want to send nudes.
Yeah, but everyone else was just sending nudes.
There's a lot of hole on Grindr.
So this was really nice. And then the ghostwriter does some digging for drama because the ghostwriter's like, this can't just be perfect. And it turns out it wasn't. When Doug first messaged Eevie, Doug was living with their partner and in an open relationship, but still in a relationship. And then after a couple weeks of talking to Eevie, Doug finally breaks up with their other partner and starts dating Eevie. And then it becomes long distance, but then the pandemic hits and they move in together. It is just kind of a perfect situation where they met right before Eevie became hugely famous. And I think for Eevie, that really mattered.
And also, Doug does not want to be famous at all and also keeps Eevie in check, it seems like. It seems like whenever Eevie's like, oh, another fan saying hello to me in another country, Doug is like, no, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then finally, Back to the Future, what's next for Yvie Oddly? So basically, they're like, I want to do everything. Mostly, I don't want to be super famous. Something interesting is I feel really fine with myself. I've worked on projects that tens of thousands to millions of people give a shit about, and I've done things that I've been really passionate about. I think my art is expressing that because instead of screaming so desperately for somebody to see me, my art is a conversation now. I still want more. I'm still hungry for more. I'm still chasing things. I'm still trying things. So I feel okay with myself because even if I don't achieve those things, at least I've gotten to do them. At least I've gotten to try. At least I get to pour some energy into it.
I loved this kind of current stance on success. I think it's so great to be like, I'm grateful for how far I've gotten. I'm grateful for the people who are watching, and I'm happy with what I'm doing right now and the opportunities I have.
Yeah, it's the process. It's the ability to try and experiment. There is no end goal. And I think they recognize that the fame helped them get these opportunities that they could try all these things. But it's like the pursuit of trying that fulfills you, not any one
achievement. Yeah. I no longer have the desire to be big. I want to keep working with different artists and keep making music because it's fun and I like the process. My worst nightmare would be becoming straight amounts of famous.
I want to get back to the root of everything, even before drag, that I've ever wanted to do. And now doing it with this realization that it's not going to, this sounds negative, but it's not going to change my life. Anything I do could change my life, but I'm not looking for something to complete me anymore, which has allowed me a lot more joy in putting things together. I want to do everything I've ever wanted to do. I want to be an artist, a dancer, a comic, a singer, a podcaster. I think this world is absolutely terrible and I have absolutely no hope for the future as a concept, which makes me just want to do whatever I want to do right now, whatever sounds good right now.
To answer the question, where does Jovan end and Eevie begin? Drag is the exploration of how we want to be perceived and how we want to feel. So to that extent, there is separation because that's Evie's number one goal, to feel what I want to feel, to make sure we have a good time. Just be here to say what I want to say. And that's not always with me in every aspect of my everyday life.
Eevie is the language I was able to use to get all of the ideas of Jovan out there. I've always been goofy, I've been smart, I've been creative, I've been extraordinary, I've been subtle and emotional. There's a lot to me and there's a lot to all of us, but Eevie is just the name that puts that all to power.
There's something else different about Eevie today, and that is a level of confidence. It's not that they've sent their inner saboteur packing, but they've read them for filth and put them in their place, at least for now. I'm fine, I'm good.
I love this. I don't want my art to be a competition anymore because it's not. I'm really excited to talk to Eevie. I really do feel it was like an interesting twist on what a memoir that we've known is. I thought that there were some like really interesting looks at like current day fame and culture and what it is to be an artist and having to like leverage the worst parts of fame. And I'm really excited to talk.
Yeah, me too. So please join me in welcoming Yvie Oddly.
Hey, thank you.
Congratulations on your book. That's a huge feat. How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling like I wrote a book. No, I feel really good. It feels cathartic to have gotten out everything that I could think at the time and be able to share it with, the people who really care about me the most. which is not my family or friends. It's my fans.
So we would love to talk to you first and foremost about like the choice of the formatting of this book, because we have read so many memoirs. That's kind of our specialty, is celebrity memoirs. And we've never seen a memoir written the style of your book. We've never seen the ghostwriter, who very much was not a ghost in this book, very present, got their own chapter, in fact, introducing themselves. I'm very interested in the choice to make it like this third person. It almost felt like a magazine article interview. Did you guys talk about that style, or was that something Michael came up with and you like checked off on it? Or how did you come to decide to have it be more this interview style book than like the first person narrative?
I feel like it just made more sense that way. We didn't really talk about it going through it as much as, you know, Michael sat down and interviewed me, my parents, my friends, everybody. And I feel like it really just works well from a third person perspective. Specifically, if for no other reason than a lot of the people who have been introduced to me were introduced to me in a sort of third person perspective, like looking at me from a reality TV show where they were the interviewer, the ghostwriter, being like, hey girl, what do you think about Silky's ugly makeup today? You know?
That's so true and interesting, especially because I feel like within kind of tight-knit performance communities like drag and things like that, a lot of times, even outside of reality TV, you hear of someone before you meet someone. We both come from a stand-up background, and we saw a lot of parallels throughout the book. And so there are so many times where someone kind of exists as this aura before you've actually gotten to talk to them, and you know more about what people say about them than you know about their personality for a long time.
Right. I also think it was just helpful to make something or somebody who is just an idea to lots of people very personal. Like, to be like, instead of Eevie sat down and said this, like, somebody clearly got to sit down. You're getting the perspective. It's like what Bella in Twilight, you know, if you give people the most cut and dry perspective to be able to insert themselves into. In our first draft, Michael actually wrote from the perspective of his drag persona. We stepped back and we're like, no, that's not enough. She's got too much character for every.
It is so interesting to think about it in terms of like, there's always a mediation between someone's perception of you and who you are. And that's true if you, a best friend, a mom, a TV character, anything. And so they met you through this reality TV persona because you're being edited by them. And then almost to have just the direct quotes feels like you're naming that perspective shift versus trying to then take your ideas and put them into the format of a book, which again is another shift away from the self. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was interesting to like name straight up that like the way I'm reading your quotes is also being mediated through the interviewer who's asking the questions. So it was definitely like an interesting twist on things that we had never seen before. I wanted to ask about your choice to use like fan art. So something we did not bring up a lot when we were talking about the plot or like the interviews of the book is that all photos of you, none of them are like direct photos. They all seem to be other people's imagery, which I thought was interesting because you are like a visual person. I think you're an artist yourself. So to only put in other people's fan art, what was the choice there?
Honestly, it was two big things mainly. It was that I am an artist, and I remember spending my youth growing up just drawing all of my favorite things, whether that be like the people, the characters, the ideas, an animal. So it's such a trip to me that I get to be somebody else's favorite thing. I'm something that people draw over and over again. And I think it's important to like give everybody the idea, the shred of hope that as an artist in this world, somebody is going to appreciate what you do. Number two, I don't want any ugly ass photos that show my actual pores and stuff. Fan art is amazing. It's a liberty taken with everything.
That's so true. We've had people paint us before, and I'm always like, oh, that's a better, no one photographed me. It's being photographed is horrible.
Take us back to the 1700s, you know? I will sit and pose for a painting for a couple of days or whatever.
The best beauty filter is the eye of the beholder of a Stan. Throughout these interviews, were you surprised at any of the patterns or the narratives that kind of revealed themselves to you that you might not have noticed already? Because I feel like sometimes you can tell when a celebrity has done therapy and then comes in and goes, well, here's what I found the pattern of my life is, like the childhood to the adolescence to the adult. These were the steps that got me here. Do you feel like that anything revealed itself to you through this process that you were surprised by?
Honestly, things are still revealing themselves to me through this process. I just reread the book again for like the third or fourth time. And I don't know if I'm just really bad at paying attention, but there are things that I'm still learning about my life that I think is pretty wild. So that just means my ability to dissociate and block them down is strong.
Incredible. It's a muscle. You got to keep training it. You got to keep training that ability to dissociate. Because your co-writer did so many extensive interviews with other people, was there anything from reading those interviews that surprised you? Was there any information or revelations from other people in your life that you weren't necessarily sitting in on that you were surprised? Or like, how did you feel about reading those passages from other people?
It was really illuminating. I'm thankful that everybody was as honest and as straightforward about things as possible. I was actually shocked, like I said, to keep discovering things that I'd never known. Like my mom in the book answered where she got my name from, and she literally refused to tell me my whole ass life. My whole ass life, I've never known why I was named what I was named. She was like, someday you'll find out. And I find out in a book.
That is such a funny thing.
In your own book.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, thanks, Mom.
Actually, you kind of answered one of my next questions. I feel like what reveals itself is like the quick pace of what has changed in your life over the past few years. And you were so young when you started doing drag. You were relatively young when you got onto RuPaul's Drag Race. And I feel like your life just hit the ground running and like things took off. And I feel like when things happen a lot, I always think of Jada Pinkett Smith's memoir. When you're like, oh yeah, of course you were feeling insane. 25,000 insane things happened to you and you never really had a breath. And then you write this book and suddenly you're going to this extensive processing experience. And I say this with love and respect. I feel like a lot of your experiences that you talk about in the book come from this place of feeling like an outsider. They come from a place of feeling insecure about your place. Like your relationship, you talk about coming back from having won Drag Race and being like, my relationships with all my friends and families will never be the same. I'll never be able to make real friends again. I know you had some problems with the girls on the show. Do you look back now and start to feel differently about those experiences now that you've like processed them?
You know, I mean, actually, no, I don't. Yes and no. That's such a cop out of an answer, but yes and no. I feel differently about my own ability to accept, perceive, deal with all of like those really intense changes, the 85,000 things that just like happen to you overnight, the whirlwind of suddenly going from being a personal person to forever a piece of public property, at least partially. I just think I've gotten better at it with time, with experience. Your first time getting punched in the face, you're going to be so shocked. Your second time getting punched in the face, you're probably still going to be so shocked, but you'll know what all these experiences are. And hopefully you will have brought a really big, beefy friend to take care and do all of your dirty fighting for you. The most cathartic thing about having written this book and getting to look back at all of my experiences is that I really do believe it helps like move forward. It's really a whole lot easier to continue writing your story once you know what chapter you left off on. And taking a step back to like reflect on everything that had happened, the ways that your world was rocked overnight. I don't know. It helped me. I feel like an adult adult ready to handle all the chaos that comes in the future, I guess.
I felt that came through in your book, to be honest. I felt that by the last chapter when you talk about your like sense of self and your performances and what you're trying to do with drag and your relationship to fame. It was interesting to see someone go through that kind of tidal wave and kind of come out and be like, okay, we're still in the ocean, but we're bobbing.
Yeah. And that's like all it's ever going to be. There's going to be those big waves that may pull you under for a second, but you've been in this ocean. You're still out here swimming. You're going to have to do your little doggy paddle if you want to float in an industry that is constantly just trying to pull you down, because it's so fierce to watch somebody resurface after all that.
Something you talk about, the triangulation of like you, fame, and your friends and family. I felt that this book was written at a point where you were like just coming off the cusp of so much change. There was a lot of like doubt in you. It feels that any relationship could ever be the same or be okay. Do you still feel that way? Or do you feel you're better at navigating? Do you feel that that was just a crazy moment? Or do you think your life and your relationships have changed irrevocably forever?
I mean, they have changed. That's, I think, the saddest thing about coming back home and having those panic attacks about the fact that all of my relationships were going to change is that they did, and they have, and it doesn't change necessarily the love that's underneath them. And I think that's something that took me a while to understand and to learn how to navigate and process. But, there is a dynamic shift. If one day your best friend is your best friend and the next day your best friend is like Oprah, the Oprah that everybody knows. It's very much that dynamic in every way. Like, you immediately become your parents' hotshot, like big city kid. Even if you don't want to, you immediately become like that distant person who's not going to text back as much. All of my relationships have changed. I think I'm just at peace with it, and I've stopped beating myself up for accidentally being at least a little famous.
How much do you feel that, like, as you, like you said, you've kind of learned how to doggy paddle and maintain your sense of self in the ocean that is being famous and a part of this industry? In your early days of drag, you talk a lot about how your drag persona was very much an authentic side of you that you were looking to let out. Do you feel that authenticity and your authenticity with the public, especially with your experiences with the fans and public life in general, do you feel that you've had to sort of curb and create a separation? What have you learned about the way that you kind of like let yourself be known?
Damn, call me out in front of everybody.
No, it's like a part of it. The way it's so stressful when people know everything about you. And so I feel like it's a skill that, any upcoming drag queen, any upcoming person in the industry, like, it's such a thing that you can't know about until you're on the other side.
We're stand-ups, and so we're like, oh, you say everything. Truth to power, tell it like it is. Be rude if it calls.
And you're like, ooh.
And then you're like, oh, it's not worth it. I cannot let you people eat me alive and destroy my soul.
In the way that, like, we can be kind of snarky, and then people think that that's just meanness. And so then they'll just come into our comments with just the meanest stuff you've ever heard.
Just some asshole shit. Because they're like, you already gave me permission.
And they're like, yeah, you can take it. You're a bitch. And I'm like, no, you're hurting my feelings.
You're like, no, Mom, this is just my birthday post. Sorry, I got distracted. What's the question in there? The question
is, so I know that like on RuPaul's Drag Race, you felt frustrated with the lack of authenticity, and like you've had, and I completely understand where you're coming from when you feel like you're being honest and you're in an industry about being vulnerable and honest, and you're looking around and all these other people are being hypocrites calling you out. But then I think you get to a place where you go, oh, I wasn't honest, I was naive. And so I think our question is, do you understand where they were coming from? Or like, what is your relationship to expecting authenticity from others?
I still expect it. I think there is a level of just putting on a front that we all do have to do. That is a part of being a performer. That's a part of being a human being, is relating to other people. We all tell a million little white lies a day. And I don't mean like direct lies. I mean, we're all playing characters in so many moments. For me, authenticity is mostly about trying to honor whatever part of that character does feel real and is the least put on specifically for them. And that's what's so difficult. I think that was the hardest thing for me after my season aired, was that people were coming up to me being like, oh my God, you're such a real bitch. And I love you for that. You're the realest. And that alone made me feel fake. I'm still team that loud bitch who was fighting so hard for authenticity, for a little bit of realness. But I do understand the dynamic of like having your public self that you are allowed to give out to everyone and your private self. You know, I definitely have learned that there's some things I deserve just for me. Some aspects of myself I deserve just for me, and some aspects of myself that are specifically performance, whether it's for me deep down or for the people in my lives. So you're just going to have to balance that. Just make sure that ultimately your performance is touching back to the root of what you want in the first place.
That is such a good point, that like sometimes protecting yourself to the public is the way that you can keep your life the most authentic to yourself. Like that is what you have to do for you. You said you still advocate for like going out there and being absolutely real. If you were to do not another season, but your first season again, and with like the knowledge you have now, is there a way that you would have sort of like adjusted conversations or like changed expectations?
No, not really.
Because also it was fun.
I don't think there's anything I could have done to adjust my expectations. It's one of those things where I just had to get into it. I had to realize that reality TV is this very strange place, and that these like 14 other drag queens I'm with are all horrible humans.
Sometimes it really is everybody but you. Sometimes you walk into the room and you go, I'm perfect. And randomly, everyone else is the problem.
How did this happen even? Oh.
I understand the stats are an anomaly, but sometimes it's everybody else in the world.
No. But I don't think there's anything else I would have done to change that, especially since I still stand by that bitch. I'm like, you were naive. You were naive for expecting that sort of authenticity or that sort of openness with everyone and everything. But I still fight for the same things that Twinkie me does, you know? I still believe in all of that. They're just a little bit louder and more passionate about it.
I mean, we related to a lot of kind of your journey because, again, we felt like it was really similar to stand up. And I saw something you, and I don't want to say like struggled with, but I think the artistry of who you are, like your drag is your art, and then also the fighting for the platform in the modern age. And the way that in order to have the platform to continue to do your art, you have to play the publicity game, which then allows you to become treated like a reality star. And I feel like you're like, I'm not a reality star. I'm a drag queen. I'm a conceptual performance artist. And I feel like for stand-up, it's like, if you want to do stand-up, then I have to be online on social media. And now I'm being called an influencer and people are picking apart my life. And I'm like, I never wanted to sell you mascara. I never really wanted to tell you what I did a day in my life, but I feel I have to. And like that struggle. And I found your final chapter about like recognizing the kind of fame you want, but then you never really get to pull yourself out unless you're like Rachel McAdams seems to never have to take a photo in her life and still get to win Oscars. The rest of us are playing this game. And I felt like so much of what you didn't like about the experience was the reality TV part and not the artist part. And I was just wondering, could you speak to like the balance you're finding in your life or the struggles you're having today of how do you maintain and grow, but like stay away from the petty, like the nonsense that isn't the soul-filling creativity.
It's hard because there is always going to be a lot of that balance. And there's going to be some days where, unfortunately, I am just a reality TV star. I go back and forth on that still occasionally. you get over it because you realize that the reason why there's so much pressure for all of us to be giving out every single part of our lives is because that's the part that we actually find interesting and the part that used to be the most withheld from us about these artists we idealize. You used to need to pick up the magazine to find out what like Brad and Jen actually thought about this mascara or whatever the fuck.
So are you saying you're coming around to it per like the audience appetite?
No, I'm saying I understand the need for it. And there's always going to be some aspect of ourselves that is just like stripping yourself down and selling the smallest pieces of yourself out in every way possible. But, you know, that's the little evils of working in a late stage capitalist society as an artist adjacent.
I have to say, I was crying that the Drag Race season finale is at the flagship Levi's. I'm like, here's this like underground queer art form. And they're like, would you like it with bootcut jeans? Like the most Americana nonsense of like farmer wear being like, and by the way, how about all these gays? Pretty great.
Look at this. Yes, we crowned a winner right here. We made them each a little patch saying, yes, fags.
If you buy new jeans, it's helpful for sustainability.
They promised us jean jackets, okay? They promised that they were like, we're going to have you each design your jean jackets. They fucking lied. And that is why everyone hates rainbow capitalism. Don't give me your corporate sponsorship on Pride if you're not actually going to give me the jean jacket you promised to my twink heart.
If I sold out, you better pay up.
Guys, right fucking now. If anyone from Levi's corporate is listening, no one from Levi's corporate is listening to this, but you're fucking boycotted until Eevie gets a jacket.
That's all I'm saying. I got my crown and scepter. I'm waiting for the jacket.
You talk a lot in your book about feeling, especially earlier in your career, and even on Drag Race All-Stars, feeling a little bit overlooked and misunderstood. If someone is being overlooked and misunderstood by like the new mainstream of drag, what advice would you give to that artist?
Be better.
Be undeniable.
No. You just know that there's a place for you. Find it, develop your craft, like follow your passions, learn. I think so much about being a groundbreaking artist is learning how to sell your art to people who have no perception of it being art yet. I think it's going out, experimenting, it's trying new things. It's realizing that with just like anything else in life, there is a sacrifice that has to come. So if you want the biggest scope of whatever your biggest dream is, there is going to be some sacrificing that has to go into that, whether that be like your point of view, your time, your money, your integrity, your asshole. Like there is going to be some sacrifice to achieve like this artistic fruition. But you can always learn how to do things your way. You can always learn how to carve your paths. Everything that has ever been done was impossible at first. So, you know, if you have these big dreams of doing art in a way that you don't really see the industry fostering, then make it. Make it, start it at a small space, blow it up, pretend that you were the first person to ever invent art, lie about it, create a Wikipedia page.
A fake resume, but for art.
If you've gotten this far, if you've gotten to the Wikipedia page, then you're already set.
It's all perception. I wanted to ask, you have a quote here that I actually really loved about starting off on drag. That's when my mind switched and I've actually begun to take in what would be the foundation of my understanding of drag, which is that how you present yourself in the world is one of the most important things. It is how people identify with you before you ever say a word. And so after a social experiment of dressing in all black for a week and having all the emo kids talk to me, then dressing preppy for a week and having the preppy bitches be cool with me, I realized that if I ever wanted gay people to see me as having a gay experience, I need to start getting gayer. It's so interesting because I feel like I had that exact same feeling of like how you are perceived as everything, especially in stand-up, like all people can see is you. And you reclaimed it and you like dove in and you said, if you're going to judge me for how I look, I'm going to look crazier than you could predict. And I feel like my feeling for so long has been resenting it and trying to almost like be invisible in some ways, because I'm like mad that you're going to judge me based on how I look. And I want you to like listen to what I'm saying and my jokes and my ideas. And I feel like reading your book was such kind of an eye opener for different ways that you can approach it. But I was wondering, at the core of it, and at the core of that truth of perception being one of the most important things as you walk through the world, what is your relationship to your understanding of that? Do you like that because of what you've been able to accomplish with drag? Or like, is there any part of you that understands feeling like angry about it? Or are you feeling so in control of your image that you see it as a great tool?
Part of me has always been angry about it. I was angry since I was the kid in high school who was like, oh, so literally all I had to do was wear black and you guys would treat me like I'm a real person? I mean, I'm still angry about it, but that's part of why I do drag is it's this like personal vindication to be able to take the power back into your own hands, to literally be able to at least, if not control, then direct the conversation or start the conversation about yourself. And we're never going to have all the power and all the control and all the ability to make all the things we want happen in our life. So I just really find so much strength in the one thing that you can control, which is, how are you going to look today? Like, you're already given this avatar, you're already given this skin. What are you going to do to dress it up and show the world what you want to be? That is how we dress ourselves is literally a projection. So while it pisses me off that we have to play these subtle games, dress up, wear the suit, like there are still places to take liberties with it and get what you want. Like RuPaul, one of her favorite quotes is, if you like making money, if you want to make money, you've got to wear a suit. And I love that quote because it's true. Like, if you want to be successful in life, you have to wear a suit. But what she doesn't say in that is that you have to also learn how to wear so many other outfits if you ever want that suit to fit right. Like, if you ever want people to see you in that suit and be like, wow, they deserve to have all of my money, that business person, then you also will have to be the person who was struggling washing windows. Wear that suit. Wear the suit of the most popular girl at the party. Wear the suit of somebody who is like vulnerable, who doesn't go out that much. Wear the suit of somebody who is so focused on work right now. Wear the suit of somebody who is a good friend. There's all these suits that you'll have to wear before. And some of these actually are more than metaphorical suits.
Brain blown. Do you have any final questions, Ashley?
No, I really enjoyed your book. I really enjoyed, based on what we were just talking about, the part where you say, like, if people are going to look at me, it's going to be because I chose it. And I feel like that's really powerful.
I hope you choose to have people look at you. I hope every day of your life, I hope you make that choice. When somebody's looking at you, you be like, no. You're looking at me because I chose this.
I summoned you in this direction. You're not creeping me out. I'm creeping you out.
Yeah, I'm creeping you out as you're following me right now.
So my final question for you is, I thought one of the more insane things in this book was that you say one of your pet peeves is sweet and sour flavoring, the flavor of sweet and sour, but you just don't have to eat it.
No, I don't have to eat it, but who the fuck put that on this planet? Especially because everybody is so in love with it. And Polynesian sauce or Thousand Island sauce or whatever. Like, grow up. Grow up, you piece of shit.
And dry your foods.
No, grow up and soak your food in disgusting amounts of ranch, mayo, hot sauce, whatever your condiment is. But at least all of those have a distinct one flavor palette that they were able to stick with. Not being this little kid, bright orange. Am I dessert? Am I dinner? Who knows?
For someone so fluid in their gender and sexuality, I feel that you are quite conservative about how a condiment can only be but one thing.
Condiments are about one thing, okay? I'm sorry. There are only two condiment genders, good and bad.
Once again, in a shocking turn of events, everybody in the world is wrong but you.
And where do you stand on soups? You talk a lot about loving soup in your book. What are your top soups?
I love soup still. Soup is probably the best thing humans have ever invented. Just like wet food. Yeah, I'm in. Favorite soup right now is anything with too much hot sauce in it.
Spicy, sexy. Thank you so much for coming on the pod and talking about our book. Do you think you have another one in you? Do you think we'll do another Yvie Oddly, odder than ever?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, especially because now I've unearthed so much trauma.
Yay!
Yeah, exactly. I got to close all the doors, all the portals to the other dimensions.
Well, thank you so much. We look forward to it, and best of luck on your book tour.
Awesome. Thank y'all. I appreciate it. Thank you for talking with me and for sharing all of my very, very correct viewpoints and opinions. 100%.
I'm glad everyone will know them now. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eevie. And Claire, how many wormtinis would you want to have?
None, because we just did a sober convo and it was so great and perfect. So I guess I didn't need to be drunk at all.
And how fertile would you call this soil?
I feel like the best of it was a 5.
Yeah.
I feel that I can't pull an average because I think where they went deep and like the parts that I was really intrigued by, I was so interested by. And then some of it, I was kind of like, okay, I feel very like zine about it, magazine-y.
Yes, I completely agree. The parts that were good were great and like worth reading. And thank you so much to our 5-star reviewers. And just a reminder, we actually will not see you guys next week because we're taking a week off. And then when we come back, it is the motherfucking summer of spelling, bitches. So we'll see you then.